The biggest twist wasn't that the billionaire married the maid. It was why his son chose her long before anyone else did. 300 of the richest people in California thought they already knew how the night would end. A billionaire widower stood on stage and swore he would only marry the woman his 7-year-old son chose. The room almost laughed. His son hadn't spoken a single word in 2 years. The promise sounded impossible, until the silent boy stepped away from the crowd, ignored every wealthy socialite in the ballroom, and walked straight toward a black maid holding a mop. Seconds later, he spoke for the first time since his mother's death. What happened next shattered reputations, exposed hidden motives, and revealed why the one person everyone overlooked was the only person who had truly seen him all along. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. Golden light spilled across polished marble floors. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with champagne. The city's most powerful people stood beneath towering floral arrangements, laughing too loudly, shaking hands too firmly, and measuring one another with practiced smiles. Outside, Beverly Hills glowed beneath a warm California night. Inside, 300 wealthy guests waited for one man to speak. Ethan Whitmore stood near the center stage, tall and composed in a black tuxedo that looked as if it had been tailored onto him. His silver cufflinks caught the light whenever he moved. To everyone watching, he appeared calm. But appearances had always been Ethan's greatest skill. For 2 years, he had worn calm like armor. 2 years since the funeral. 2 years since the hospital room. 2 years since the woman he loved had disappeared from his life forever. The crowd saw a billionaire, a CEO, a widower who had survived tragedy. What they didn't see was a man who still woke up some mornings reaching toward the empty side of his bed. The foundation gala had become an annual tradition. Charity, cameras, speeches, smiles. Tonight should have been no different. Yet the pressure had been building for months. Board members, investors, friends, family. Everyone wanted the same thing. Move on, remarry, create stability, present a complete image to the world. The story of a grieving billionaire was beginning to make people uncomfortable. And uncomfortable stories affected business. Ethan knew it. They knew it. Nobody bothered pretending otherwise anymore. A woman in an emerald gown leaned toward him from the front table. "People worry about you, Ethan," another guest added. "And they worry about Noah." Someone else smiled. "A child needs a mother." The sentence landed harder than they intended, or perhaps exactly as intended. Ethan glanced toward the front row. Noah sat quietly beside his grandmother. 7 years old, small for his age, dark hair neatly combed, tiny navy suit, and silent, always silent. The boy stared at the floor while conversations swirled around him. He hadn't spoken in 2 years, not to doctors, not to teachers, not to therapists, not even to his father. The room's attention shifted back toward Ethan as the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue our evening, we'd like to thank the Whitmore Foundation and its founder, Mr. Ethan Whitmore." Applause erupted. Polite, controlled, expensive. Ethan stepped forward. The microphone waited. So did 300 pairs of eyes. He thanked donors, mentioned scholarships, talked about community programs. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. Until a voice called from the crowd. It came from a board member, old enough to know better, bold enough not to care. "So tell us, Ethan." Laughter rippled through the room. "When are you finally getting married again?" The ballroom exploded with amused murmurs. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. Several women smiled. Others straightened in their seats. Near the stage, Claire Montgomery lowered her wine glass and watched carefully. beautiful, elegant, perfect. For nearly 2 years, everyone had assumed she would become the next Mrs. Whitmore. After all, she had been Ethan's late wife's closest friend. She attended family events, charity functions, business dinners. She already occupied the empty space beside him whenever photographers appeared. The future seemed obvious. Everyone was simply waiting for Ethan to say it out loud. The master of ceremonies chuckled. Looks like they want an answer. More laughter. Ethan didn't smile. His gaze drifted once more toward Noah. The boy remained still, silent, watching nothing, or perhaps everything. A strange calm settled over Ethan. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was the realization that he was tired of being cornered. Whatever the reason, when he finally spoke, his voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "If I ever marry again," the crowd immediately quieted. Forks stopped moving. Glasses froze halfway to lips. "It will only be the woman my son chooses." Silence. Absolute silence. The sentence echoed across the room. Then came confusion. People exchanged looks. Some frowned. Others smiled uncertainly. A few laughed softly. Because everyone understood what Ethan had really said. Never. His son hadn't spoken in 2 years. A child who never spoke couldn't choose. The vow was impossible. A locked door. An elegant refusal disguised as hope. Claire's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stepped away from the microphone. Conversations slowly began returning to the room. The matter was settled, or so everyone thought. Then something moved. At first, hardly anyone noticed. A small chair scraped lightly against the floor. Noah stood up. His grandmother reached toward him. He gently pulled away. The boy stepped into the aisle. One guest stopped speaking. Then another. Heads began turning. A strange ripple moved across the ballroom. Noah kept walking. Slowly. Deliberately. Past the front tables. Past the investors. Past the socialites. Past Claire. She offered him a warm smile. He didn't even look at her. The room grew quieter with every step. Nobody understood where he was going. Ethan felt his heartbeat begin to climb. "Noah?" No response. The boy continued forward, straight through the center of the ballroom. Guests parted instinctively. The crowd watched as if witnessing something sacred or dangerous. Noah walked all the way to the back of the room, toward the service area, toward the people nobody had been paying attention to all night, toward a woman kneeling beside a champagne spill near the wall. She wore a simple housekeeping uniform. Dark skin, hair pulled neatly back, rubber gloves, a cleaning cloth in one hand. She looked up only when the room suddenly went silent around her. Grace Turner blinked in confusion. For a second, she thought someone important must be standing behind her. She turned. Nobody. When she looked back, Noah Whitmore was standing directly in front of her. The billionaire's son. The silent boy. The child everyone worried about. The entire ballroom held its breath. Grace stared. Noah stared back. Neither moved. Then the little boy slowly reached out and took her hand. The gasp that swept through the room sounded almost like a wave crashing against a shore. 300 wealthy people froze. Champagne glasses hovered in midair. Claire's face lost all color. Ethan stood rooted to the floor. And Grace Turner, the woman who had spent the entire evening invisible, found herself at the center of every eye in the ballroom. Noah held her hand tightly, as if he had crossed the entire room for that purpose alone, as if he had known exactly where he was going all along. And in that moment, Nobody in the ballroom understood the same terrifying question. Why her? Why had the boy ignored every powerful woman in the room and chosen the black maid standing beside a bucket and a mop? The question hung over the ballroom long after the music stopped. Grace Turner felt every eye in the room settle on her at once. For years, she had been invisible. Now she wished she still was. The cleaning cloth slipped from her hand and landed softly beside the bucket. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the silence. The little boy still held her hand. His fingers were warm, steady, certain, as if he belonged there, as if she belonged there. Grace glanced toward the stage. The billionaire stood frozen. The beautiful woman beside him looked like someone had just shattered a priceless vase in front of her. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Noah slowly released Grace's hand. The spell broke. Conversations erupted all around the room. Questions, whispers, confused laughter, shock. The noise came rushing back all at once. Grace bent quickly, picked up her cloth, and returned to cleaning the champagne spill. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Work. Keep moving. Stay small. Stay unnoticed. But nothing felt unnoticed anymore. A supervisor hurried toward her. Grace. His voice was tense. Finish up in the back. She nodded. No arguments. No questions. Just relief. She pushed the bucket toward the service corridor and disappeared through the swinging doors, while the ballroom buzzed behind her like a disturbed beehive. She never saw Ethan Whitmore watching her leave. She never saw Noah turning his head to follow her until the doors closed. And she certainly didn't hear the question Ethan whispered under his breath. Who is she? Because Ethan Whitmore truly didn't know. Not yet. 3 miles away from the polished streets of Beverly Hills, another world waited. South Los Angeles looked very different after midnight. Streetlights flickered above cracked sidewalks. A taco truck still glowed beside a gas station. Old murals stretched across brick walls painted years before. The city felt tired but alive. Grace drove home in a 12-year-old Honda that rattled whenever she hit a pothole. The heater worked when it wanted to. The driver's side window stuck halfway down, but it got her where she needed to go. Most days that was enough. Her apartment building sat between a laundromat and a corner store protected by metal bars. The paint peeled from the stair railings. One hallway light had been broken for months. Grace climbed the stairs carrying groceries she'd picked up after work. The apartment door opened before she could reach for her key. A little girl launched herself into her arms. "Mama!" Grace laughed despite her exhaustion. "Easy there." Lily wrapped her arms around her waist. "You were late." "I know." Grace kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I'm sorry." The apartment smelled like macaroni and cheese. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, sat at the tiny kitchen table drinking tea. "Long night?" she asked. Grace smiled. "The longest." Mrs. Ramirez had watched Lily more times than Grace could count. Without her, life would have fallen apart years ago. The older woman narrowed her eyes. "You look like something happened." Grace hesitated. Then she shook her head. "Just work." Because how exactly was she supposed to explain what happened? A billionaire's silent son crossed a ballroom and chose me. Even saying it inside her own head sounded ridiculous. Lily tugged her hand. "Can we read tonight?" No matter how tired she was, Grace never said no to that. Books were sacred in their little apartment. They escaped through books. They dreamed through books. Some nights they survived through books. An hour later, Lily lay curled beneath a blanket, while Grace read aloud beside her bed. The child drifted slowly toward sleep. "Mama?" "Yeah, baby? Did anything good happen today?" Grace smiled. Children asked the simplest questions. Sometimes the hardest ones, too. She thought about the ballroom, the whispers, the staring, the strange look on Noah's face. Then she remembered something else. The feeling of his small hand reaching for hers. Not fear, not confusion. Trust, pure trust. The kind children gave only when they meant it. Yeah, Grace said softly. I think something good happened. Lily smiled sleepily. Good. Within seconds, she was asleep. Grace remained there for a while, watching, listening to the soft rhythm of her daughter's breathing. The apartment was quiet. But quiet never bothered Grace. She had grown up with much worse. Growing up, silence often meant the electricity had been shut off, or the landlord had left another notice on the door, or her mother was trying not to cry. The hardest years came out after her mother got sick. Medical bills arrived faster than paychecks. One month they lost the car. The next month they lost the house. Grace had been 16, old enough to understand exactly how quickly life could change. Young enough to believe hard work could fix everything. She still believed in hard work. She just no longer believed it fixed everything. Sometimes it simply helped you survive. The next morning began before sunrise. At 5:30, Grace was already awake. Coffee brewed in a chipped pot. Lily finished homework at the kitchen table. The city slowly brightened outside. Another day, another shift, another 100 strangers who would never remember her name. The Beverly Regency Hotel rose above the city like a palace of glass and stone. Luxury lived there. Grace cleaned it. That was the arrangement. Inside the employee entrance, workers hurried through security checkpoints. Housekeepers, servers, maintenance crews, people who made luxury possible. People few guests ever noticed. Grace tied on her uniform and started her shift. By 10 o'clock, she had cleaned 6 suites. By noon, she had changed enough towels to fill a truck. By 2 o'clock, her feet already hurt. Yet she never complained. Because every paycheck mattered. Every hour mattered. Every dollar mattered. Especially when you were raising a child alone. Around 3 that afternoon, Grace stepped into the employee break room. A television mounted near the ceiling played a local entertainment segment. She barely paid attention, until she heard a familiar name. Ethan Whitmore. The anchor smiled from the screen. Last night's Whitmore Foundation Gala raised a record amount for children's programs. Footage flashed across the television. The ballroom, the chandeliers, the guests, the stage. Then suddenly, Noah, walking, crossing the room, toward her. The clip lasted only a few seconds, but every employee in the room noticed. A server pointed at the screen. Wait, another worker laughed. Isn't that you? Grace nearly dropped her coffee. Her face appeared briefly on television. Bucket, mop, uniform. Then the clip ended. The room exploded with questions. What happened? Why did he do that? Did he know you? Grace forced a smile. I don't know, but because she truly didn't. Not completely. Not yet. But somewhere inside her, a memory surfaced. A small boy sitting alone. A pair of sad eyes. A quiet face she had seen before. Maybe once. Maybe twice. Maybe more. A strange feeling settled over her. Like pieces of a puzzle beginning to move. Not together yet. Just closer. That evening, as the California sun dropped behind the city skyline, a black SUV rolled through Beverly Hills. Inside, Ethan Whitmore sat beside his son. Neither spoke. The silence between them had lasted 2 years. Normally, Ethan no longer noticed it. Tonight, he noticed nothing else. He looked at Noah. The boy stared out the window. Calm, thoughtful, almost peaceful, for the first time in years. Finally, Ethan asked the question he couldn't stop asking himself. Who was she? Noah didn't answer. The city lights reflected in the glass. The boy remained silent. But for the briefest moment, a tiny smile appeared and disappeared. As if he knew something nobody else did. Something that had begun long before that ballroom. Long before the vow. Long before 300 millionaires turned around to stare. And somewhere across the city, completely unaware of the storm beginning to gather around her life, Grace Turner tucked her daughter into bed and prepared for another ordinary day. Not knowing that a 7-year-old boy had already changed everything. Not knowing that the answer to Ethan's question was waiting in the past, and that very soon, both of them would have to revisit it. The first time Grace Turner truly noticed Noah Whitmore, rain was running down the tall glass windows of the Beverly Regency Hotel. Los Angeles rarely looked gray. That afternoon, it did. The sky hung low over the city. Cars moved through wet streets below, their headlights glowing against the pavement. Inside the hotel lobby, everything remained warm and polished. Soft piano music floated through the air. Guests checked in beneath enormous crystal fixtures, while fresh flowers filled the room with the scent of lilies. Grace was carrying a stack of folded towels toward the service elevator when she saw him. A small boy sitting alone behind the grand piano. Not at the piano. Behind it. Hidden from most of the lobby. Almost like he wanted to disappear. At first, she thought he belonged to one of the wealthy families staying at the hotel. Children often wandered through the lobby while parents attended meetings or lunches. But something about him felt different. Most children moved, fidgeted, looked around, played games. This boy sat completely still. His small hands rested in his lap. His eyes remained fixed on the rain beyond the windows. Grace slowed for a moment, not because she was curious, because she recognized loneliness when she saw it. She had spent enough years carrying it herself. Then a manager called her name from across the lobby. The moment passed. Work continued. The next day she saw him again. Same place, same silence, same distant stare. The third day, too. Then the fourth. Eventually she stopped wondering if he was a guest. She started wondering why nobody seemed concerned that a child spent hours sitting alone. One afternoon, she finally learned his name. A sharply dressed nanny hurried through the lobby carrying a tablet and several folders. She stopped beside the piano. "Come on, Noah." The boy didn't move. "We have speech therapy in 20 minutes. Nothing. The nanny sighed heavily. The kind of sigh exhausted adults use when they believe nobody is watching. Grace watched from the front desk corridor. The woman crouched down. "Please, Noah." Still nothing. After another moment, the nanny gently took his hand and led him away. Noah. The name stayed with Grace. A week later, she learned who he was. The entire staff knew Ethan Whitmore. Everybody did. The billionaire owned half the buildings visible from the hotel's rooftop. When he visited, security became nervous. Managers suddenly appeared everywhere. The lobby became spotless. Employees were reminded to be professional, as if they weren't already. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up outside. The doorman immediately straightened. Several executives emerged from a conference room, and Ethan Whitmore entered the lobby. Tall, confident, expensive. He moved through the room with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to people making space for him. Behind him walked Noah, the same silent little boy. Grace paused beside a housekeeping cart. For the first time, she saw them together, father and son. Yet somehow they looked lonely in exactly the same way. Noah disappeared behind the piano. Ethan disappeared into a private meeting. Neither looked happy about where they were going. The realization stayed with Grace long after her shift ended. Over the next several months, she saw them regularly, not every day, but often enough. The pattern never changed. Ethan attended meetings. Noah sat behind the piano. The child never caused trouble, never demanded attention, never complained. He simply watched. Sometimes the rain, sometimes the street, sometimes nothing at all. People tried talking to him. Bellhops, receptionists, hotel guests, doctors, therapists. Everyone seemed determined to make him speak, and every attempt ended the same way. Silence. One rainy afternoon, Grace entered the lobby carrying fresh linens. Noah sat alone again. A paper cup rested beside him. Hot chocolate. Untouched. The boy stared at it. Not drinking. Not moving. Just staring. Grace slowed. Something about the scene bothered her. Then she noticed the steam had stopped rising. The drink had gone cold. She glanced around. Nobody was paying attention. The nanny was busy on a phone call. The front desk was crowded. The boy remained forgotten behind the piano. Grace walked quietly toward the nearby cafe station. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a fresh cup. Noah looked up as she approached. His eyes were darker than she expected. Older somehow. The eyes of someone who had spent too much time watching the world disappoint him. Grace set the cup beside him. She didn't crouch. Didn't smile too hard. Didn't use the careful voice adults often used around sad children. She simply replaced the cold drink with a warm one. Then she pointed toward it. That one's hot. Noah stared at her. No response. Grace nodded. Thought you should know, still nothing. Most adults would have kept talking, filled the silence, asked questions. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded napkin, and with quick, practiced fingers transformed it into a tiny paper bird. Years ago, Lily had loved those birds. Grace still made them without thinking. She placed it beside the cup. There. Then she turned to leave. Halfway across the lobby, she stopped. Not because Noah had spoken, because she realized she wanted to say one more thing. She looked back. The little boy was studying the paper bird, carefully, like it might disappear. You don't have to talk to be heard. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, no pity, no pressure, just truth. Then she walked away. The next day, Noah was back behind the piano. The paper bird sat beside him. The same bird. The edges slightly bent from handling. Grace noticed it immediately. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. Days passed, then weeks. A strange routine began forming. Whenever she crossed the lobby, Grace would nod. Morning, Noah. Or, good afternoon. Nothing more. No questions. No expectations. The boy never answered, but he always looked up. Always. And that mattered more than most people would understand. One afternoon, a storm rolled across Los Angeles. Thunder echoed outside. Rain hammered the glass. The lobby emptied. Most guests remained upstairs. Grace was refilling supplies when she noticed Noah sitting unusually close to the window. His attention remained fixed on the sidewalk outside. Not the rain. Something else. She followed his gaze. A golden retriever trotted down the street with its owner, tail wagging wildly, completely unconcerned about the weather. For the first time, Grace saw Noah react. Not dramatically, just slightly. His shoulders lifted. His eyes brightened. A tiny change, but unmistakable. The next day at nearly the same hour, the dog appeared again. And once again, Noah watched. The day after that, too. A pattern. Grace smiled to herself. The boy had a friend, even if the friend didn't know it. A week later, she brought hot chocolate to his table just before the dog arrived. No explanation, no announcement. She simply set it down. 30 seconds later, the golden retriever appeared outside. Noah looked at the dog, then at the drink, then at Grace. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face, followed by something else. Recognition. She knew. She had noticed. Grace simply shrugged. Good timing. And walked away. That evening, Noah remained by the window longer than usual, watching the dog disappear into the distance, watching the rain, watching Grace. And somewhere deep inside a grieving 7-year-old boy, something tiny began to shift. Not healing. Not yet. Trust comes before healing, and trust had been missing from his world for a very long time. Meanwhile, upstairs in a private conference room, Ethan Whitmore stared through another set of windows. The city stretched beneath him. Meetings, contracts, numbers, success, all the things he once believed he could control. Yet every evening he returned home to a sun he could not reach, a sun slipping farther away despite every expert money could buy. For 2 years, Ethan had searched for answers. He never considered they might be waiting downstairs, near a piano, in the kindness of a woman whose name he didn't even know. And as another rainy afternoon faded into evening, Noah sat quietly behind the grand piano, holding a paper bird, watching a dog outside, and for the first time in a very long while, looking forward to tomorrow. That feeling became something Noah quietly carried with him. Not excitement, not happiness. Those emotions still felt too far away. But curiosity, a reason to look up, a reason to notice the clock, a reason to wonder whether the woman with the paper birds would be working that day. The adults around him didn't notice the change. They were too busy measuring progress, too busy asking questions, too busy searching for words. Grace never asked for words. That was why Noah trusted her. Spring slowly gave way to summer in Los Angeles. The days grew brighter. Tourists filled the hotel lobby. Palm trees swayed outside beneath endless blue skies. Life moved forward. At least for everyone, except Ethan Whitmore. The Billionaire's days looked successful from the outside. Board meetings, television interviews, new developments, charity projects. But every evening ended exactly the same way. A silent dinner table, a silent car ride home, a silent child. Some nights Ethan would stand outside Noah's bedroom door and listen. Not for words. He had stopped hoping for words, just for movement. Proof his son was still there. Proof he hadn't disappeared completely behind that wall of silence. The experts kept promising progress, patience, time, healing. But time felt cruel when measured in years. Meanwhile, Noah kept visiting the Beverly Regency, and every visit followed a familiar pattern. The piano, the window, the dog, the hot chocolate. Grace. One afternoon, he arrived carrying something new, a sketchbook. The nanny noticed immediately. "That's good, Noah." No response, but he opened it anyway. Page after page contained drawings, trees, cars, buildings, dogs, rain, people, lots of people. Yet there was something strange about them. Most had no faces, only outlines, shapes, shadows, as if Noah saw people but couldn't quite reach them. Then halfway through the book, the nanny found a drawing that made her pause. A woman, dark skin, curly hair tied back, holding a tray, standing near a window. This figure had a face. The nanny looked toward Grace across the lobby, then back at the drawing. She said nothing, but she noticed. Noah quietly took the sketchbook back, closing it, protecting it. The same way children protect important things. the same way adults protect important people. A few weeks later, trouble arrived disguised as an ordinary Tuesday. Grace knew it would be a difficult day before she even left home. Her regular babysitter had canceled. Again. The third time that month. Lily sat at the kitchen table while Grace stared at her phone. No answers. No backup plans. No relatives nearby. No extra money for emergency childcare. Just a single mother and a problem that needed solving before her shift started. "What happens now?" Lily asked. Grace forced a smile. "We figure it out." That was always the answer. Because when you are raising a child alone, figuring it out becomes a way of life. By noon, Grace had exhausted every option. Finally, she did something she hated doing. She brought Lily to work. The Beverly Regency allowed it occasionally during emergencies, as long as children stayed out of sight, out of the way, invisible. Grace hated that part, but she didn't have a choice. Lily sat in a small employee lounge behind the kitchen. She had coloring books, snacks, a tablet, and strict instructions not to wander. "Promise me." "I promise. Stay right here." Lily nodded. Grace kissed her forehead, then hurried back to work. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The hotel buzzed with activity. Business lunches, wedding consultations, tourists checking in. Nothing unusual. Then around 4 o'clock, the lounge became crowded. Supplies needed moving. Staff needed space. The manager approached Grace. "Can you relocate your daughter for a little while?" Grace swallowed. "Where?" He looked uncomfortable. "Maybe the staff dining area." She nodded. Anything to avoid causing trouble. Lily gathered her crayons and followed her mother without complaint. The child had learned flexibility early, another skill poverty teaches. The staff dining area sat near the edge of a private restaurant section, mostly empty during afternoon hours. Grace settled Lily into a corner booth. A grilled cheese sandwich arrived from the kitchen, a glass of lemonade, coloring pages. For a little while, everything seemed fine. Then a woman noticed. The woman wore designer sunglasses indoors, diamond earrings, a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Grace earned in a month. She sat with 3 friends near the window. At first, she simply stared. Then she frowned. Then she called a waiter. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Soon, the restaurant manager appeared. Then another supervisor. Grace knew that look. Anyone who works in service long enough learns to recognize it. The look that says someone important is unhappy, and someone less important will pay for it. The manager approached carefully. "Grace." His voice carried the apology before the words arrived. She already knew. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "What's wrong?" The manager glanced toward the wealthy woman, then toward Lily. "One of our guests is uncomfortable." There it was. Grace looked at her daughter. Lily sat quietly coloring a picture of a horse, not bothering anyone, not making noise, just existing. And somehow that had become the problem. The wealthy woman wasn't even trying to hide her irritation anymore. Her voice carried across the room. "This is a luxury hotel." Several guests turned. The woman continued, "Not a daycare center for employees." The word employees sounded worse than an insult. Grace felt heat rise into her face. Not embarrassment. Anger. The kind that comes when someone points at your child and treats them like an inconvenience. But anger wouldn't pay rent. Anger wouldn't keep her job. So she swallowed it. The manager shifted awkwardly. "Could you move her somewhere else?" Grace looked out the window. Rain had started falling unexpectedly. Heavy rain. The kind Southern California only gets a few times each year. Outside looked cold, gray. unwelcoming. Inside looked warm, safe. Yet somehow her daughter wasn't allowed to remain. For a moment, Grace considered arguing, demanding fairness, demanding basic decency. But she knew how those conversations ended. People with power rarely lose them. People without power usually lose something else. So she walked calmly to the booth. Lily looked up, confused. "Are we moving again?" Grace smiled softly. "Looks like it." The little girl immediately started gathering her crayons. No complaints, no tears. That somehow hurt even more. Children shouldn't become this accustomed to being moved aside. Grace helped her pack everything. Then she crouched beside her daughter. The room remained silent, watching, waiting. The wealthy woman watched too, perhaps expecting shame, perhaps expecting apologies. Instead, she saw something else. Grace brushed a loose braid behind Lily's ear, then spoke quietly, but clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby." Lily blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Grace smiled gently. "You didn't do one thing wrong." The child's shoulders relaxed. Around them, several conversations stopped. Grace continued. "Sometimes grown-ups forget kids are people." Lily listened carefully. Grace squeezed her hand. "When that happens, it's their mistake." A pause. "Not yours." Something changed in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but noticeably. Several guests lowered their eyes. The wealthy woman's face tightened. Grace stood, collected the coloring books, and walked away holding her daughter's hand. Head high, back straight. No apology, no shame, just dignity. Across the restaurant, hidden behind a decorative divider near the lobby entrance, Noah Whitmore had witnessed every second. He saw the woman complain. He saw the manager fold. He saw Lily's confusion. Most importantly, he saw Grace protect her daughter without becoming cruel, without becoming small, without becoming afraid. The little boy watched until Grace disappeared around the corner. Then he looked down at the paper bird resting beside his hot chocolate. And for the first time in many months, something inside him became certain. Not about words, not yet, but about her. The adults kept telling Noah who he should trust, who should comfort him, who should replace what he had lost. But children often see truths adults miss. And that rainy afternoon, while thunder rolled across Los Angeles and water streamed down the hotel windows, a silent 7-year-old quietly made a decision. One that would change every life connected to his. Though nobody knew it yet. Not Ethan, not Grace, not even Lily. Because some choices begin long before they are spoken aloud. And Noah Whitmore had just begun choosing. The adults around him never noticed. That was the strange thing about children. People watched them constantly, corrected them, directed them, planned their futures. Yet somehow they still missed what children were actually thinking. Noah learned that lesson long ago, especially after his mother died. The world had become full of adults telling him what he felt, what he needed, what would make him better. Nobody asked. They simply decided. And nowhere was that more obvious than with Claire Montgomery. The first time Claire appeared after his mother's funeral, Noah had been 5 years old. The house had smelled like flowers. Too many flowers. Every room seemed crowded with sympathy. People carrying casseroles. People speaking softly. People hugging too long. People looking at him with sad eyes. Claire had arrived carrying a framed photograph of his mother. She cried. Everyone cried. At first, Noah liked her. She had known his mother. She told stories, made people laugh, brought meals, helped organize things when Ethan could barely get through a day. For months, Claire seemed like one more person grieving, one more person trying to help. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Not suddenly, quietly, like a shadow growing longer across a room. The first sign came during a family dinner. Noah remembered sitting silently beside his father while Claire arranged plates on the dining table. She smiled warmly. "Your mom always put the forks on this side." Then she moved them. Noah stared. A small thing. Meaningless, perhaps. Except she said it 3 times that evening. "Your mom used to do this. Your mom liked that. Your mom would have wanted this." By dessert, Noah no longer heard Claire's voice. He heard his mother's name being used over and over like a key trying to open a locked door. At 6 years old, he couldn't explain why it bothered him. He only knew it did. The older he grew, the more often Claire appeared. School events, birthday dinners, charity functions, holiday gatherings, photographs, always photographs. There was always a camera somewhere nearby. And somehow Claire always ended up standing beside Ethan when it appeared. One afternoon, Noah wandered into his grandmother's sitting room and found a stack of society magazines on the coffee table. Claire smiled from 3 different covers. In one photograph, she stood beside Ethan during a fundraising event. In another, she accompanied him to a museum opening. The headline read, "Has Ethan Whitmore finally found love again?" Noah stared at the picture, then quietly turned the magazine over. He didn't like the feeling it gave him. Not because he disliked Claire. Not yet. Because something about it felt rehearsed. Like a play everyone knew except him. A few weeks later, he learned he wasn't imagining things. The Whitmore estate sat high above the city in the hills. White stone, floor-to-ceiling windows, perfect landscaping. Everything expensive. Everything controlled. One evening, Noah sat on the grand staircase drawing in his sketchbook. Nobody noticed him. That happened often. Adults assumed silent children weren't paying attention. The voices drifted from the library below. His grandmother, a board member, Claire, and Ethan. Noah heard his name, so he listened. "He needs stability," someone said. Claire sighed softly. "I only want what's best for him." His grandmother answered, "And you've already become part of this family." A pause. Then another voice. One of the board members. "The public already sees you that way." Noah looked down through the staircase railing. The adults sat around a polished table. Claire lowered her eyes modestly, almost shy. The performance was perfect. Then came the sentence Noah never forgot. It would be the natural next step. Natural. The word settled heavily inside him, because nobody had asked him, not one person. The conversation continued. The adults discussing futures, appearances, public perception, healing. The entire time Noah sat above them unnoticed, listening, learning, keeping score. That night he added something new to his sketchbook, a page divided into 2 columns. On one side he drew people who felt safe. On the other side he drew people who didn't. Grace appeared on the safe side, the first person there. Claire appeared on the opposite page, not because she was cruel, not because she yelled, not because she was mean, because she always seemed to want something. Children know the difference. Adults often don't. Months passed. The distance between Noah and Claire quietly grew. The woman noticed. Of course she noticed. She had built her life around reading rooms, reading people, managing impressions. One afternoon she found Noah sitting beneath a tree on the Whitmore property. The California sun painted gold across the lawn. Claire sat beside him, close enough to appear affectionate, far enough not to scare him away. You know, she said softly, your mother loved this spot. Noah kept drawing. Claire smiled. She used to sit here and talk for hours. No response. The smile remained. She'd want you to be happy. Still nothing. Claire leaned slightly closer. She'd want you to trust me. That finally made Noah stop drawing. Not speak, just stop. Claire mistook it for progress. It wasn't. The boy stared at the page, a hard knot forming somewhere inside him. His mother would want. His mother would want. His mother would want. Everyone kept saying it, yet nobody actually knew. His mother wasn't there to answer, and somehow her absence had become everyone's favorite argument. Claire gently touched his shoulder. Your mom would want you to call me family. Noah closed his sketchbook, then stood and walked away. Claire watched him leave, confused. For the first time, something almost like frustration crossed her face, because despite all her effort, the boy remained beyond her reach. Meanwhile, Ethan remained trapped inside his own grief. He saw pieces, fragments, but never the whole picture. He noticed Noah withdrawing. He noticed Claire trying. He noticed tension. Yet he interpreted everything through exhaustion, through loss, through guilt. The last 2 years had turned every decision into a minefield, and Claire represented something familiar. Someone who had loved his wife. Someone who understood the pain. Or so he believed. One evening after another long day, Ethan arrived at the Beverly Regency for a business dinner. The lobby buzzed with activity. The golden retriever trotted past outside. Noah watched from the window. Grace arrived moments later carrying hot chocolate. Right on time. No announcement. No fuss. Just kindness. The boy looked up at her, then toward the dog, then back again. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding. Ethan saw it. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. He frowned. Something about the exchange felt important. He couldn't explain why. The meeting pulled him away before he could think about it further. But later that night, while driving home through the glowing streets of Los Angeles, a strange thought returned. Noah looked at that woman differently. Not the way children look at strangers. Not the way they look at staff. The look reminded Ethan of something he hadn't seen in years. Trust. The realization unsettled him. Not because he objected, because it highlighted something painful. His son trusted a hotel maid more than most people in his own life, and Ethan had absolutely no idea why. Back at the Whitmore estate, Noah sat in bed with his sketchbook open. The moonlight spilled across the pages. Safe people. Unsafe people. The lists had grown. Teachers, doctors, family friends, board members, nannies, Claire, Grace. The names weren't really about good or bad. Children understand something adults forget. A person can be good and still not feel safe. A person can be kind and still ask too much. A person can smile while trying to become something they were never invited to be. Noah studied Claire's page, then Grace's. The difference was simple. Claire always wanted him to become something. Braver, warmer, more accepting, more healed. Grace wanted nothing. She simply showed up, day after day. Hot chocolate, paper birds, small kindnesses, no expectations, no conditions, for a child carrying grief heavier than most adults could imagine. That difference meant everything, and somewhere far beyond the walls of the Whitmore estate, Grace tucked Lily into bed and prepared for another early morning. Completely unaware that she had become the most important person in a 7-year-old boy's world. Completely unaware that every move she made was being watched, measured, remembered, and that very soon a battle she didn't even know existed, would begin. Because while Noah had already chosen who felt safe, the adults around him had already chosen someone else. And the harder Noah pulled away from Claire Montgomery, the harder the world seemed determined to push her toward him. Summer settled over Los Angeles in waves of heat. Palm trees stood motionless against bright skies. Luxury magazines continued publishing photographs of Ethan Whitmore and Claire attending fundraisers, museum openings, and charity dinners together. The headlines practically wrote themselves. America's most eligible billionaire, a love story after loss, the perfect family waiting to happen. Noah saw every one of them. Not because he wanted to, because adults left magazines everywhere. Waiting rooms, coffee tables, conference rooms. People assumed children didn't notice. They were wrong. One Friday afternoon, Ethan received a call from his mother. By sunset, plans had already been made. A private dinner, small gathering, close friends, business associates, potential investors. The kind of evening wealthy people called intimate, despite requiring a staff of 20. The event would take place at a sprawling Bel Air estate owned by one of Ethan's longtime partners. Claire would attend. Of course she would. By then, Claire attended everything. Meanwhile, across town, Grace Turner was ending a shift at the Beverly Regency when her supervisor approached. "Need a favor?" Grace immediately knew what that meant. Favors in hospitality usually weren't favors. They were assignments nobody else wanted. The supervisor handed her a schedule. "Private event tonight." Grace glanced at the address. Bel Air. Rich neighborhood. Very rich neighborhood. She sighed. "I've already worked 8 hours. Triple pay." Grace paused. Triple pay mattered. School supplies mattered. Rent mattered. Life mattered. "Okay." The supervisor smiled. "Knew you'd say yes." No. He knew she needed the money. There was a difference. 2 hours later, Grace arrived at the estate. The property looked more like a resort than a home. A circular driveway curved around a fountain illuminated by hidden lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Music drifted through open windows. Inside, marble floors reflected golden chandeliers. Everything gleamed. Everything looked untouched by ordinary life. Grace tied on an apron and joined the catering staff. She didn't think about Ethan, or Noah, or Claire. Not yet. For her, it was another shift, another night earning money for Lily. Nothing more. At least that's what she believed. The evening unfolded smoothly at first. Guests mingled, champagne flowed, business conversations blended with polite laughter. Grace moved through the room carrying trays and clearing glasses. Invisible, the way wealthy people often preferred their staff. Near the center of the house, Ethan stood speaking with investors. Claire remained close beside him. Elegant, polished, always positioned perfectly whenever someone raised a camera. From across the room, Noah sat quietly in a leather chair near a bookshelf. A glass of lemonade rested untouched beside him. The adults ignored him. The boy ignored them right back. Then something happened. Not dramatic, not loud. Just one small moment. The kind that reveals everything. Grace entered the room carrying appetizers. As she passed Noah, she noticed him staring toward a large painting hanging above the fireplace. A sailboat on a stormy sea. Most people wouldn't have thought twice about it. Grace did. She slowed briefly. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough. Looks like the boat's trying hard. The words slipped out softly. Casual. No expectation of a reply. Noah glanced up, then back at the painting. Grace kept walking. That was all. A tiny exchange. meaningless to everyone else. Not to Noah, because once again, she wasn't asking him to perform. She wasn't asking him to heal. She wasn't asking him to speak. She was simply sharing the moment. A little later, Grace stepped into the kitchen. Her phone vibrated. Lily. The sight of her daughter's name immediately made her smile. She answered, "Hey, baby." For a moment, everything sounded normal. Then she heard it. The hesitation. The small tremble in Lily's voice. Children try to be brave. Mothers always know. You okay? A pause. I'm fine. Another pause. Too long. Grace closed her eyes. Lily. The truth arrived quietly. Mrs. Ramirez had gone to bed early. A thunderstorm had started. The lights flickered twice, and now Lily was scared. Not terrified, just lonely. 7-year-olds aren't supposed to spend evenings pretending they aren't afraid. Grace softened her voice. I'm coming home soon. I know. You can call me anytime. I know. Grace smiled sadly. I love you. I love you too. The call ended. For a second, she simply stood there. A mother trying to be in two places at once. The kitchen door opened. A fellow server called her name. Back to work. Back to pretending. An hour later, dessert was served. The evening reached that comfortable phase where wealthy guests relaxed enough to reveal who they truly were. Some became kinder. Others became worse. Grace had learned there was rarely a middle ground. One particular guest belonged firmly in the second category. Her name was Victoria Langford. Old money, sharp tongue, expensive jewelry, the kind of woman who treated service staff as part of the furniture. She sat near Claire discussing charity work. Ironically, Victoria spotted Grace returning from the hallway after checking her phone. That one. Grace heard her own voice become the subject. Claire followed Victoria's gaze. Neither woman lowered their voices. Single mother, right? Victoria asked. Claire took a sip of wine. I think so. Victoria smiled. Not kindly. They always look exhausted. The women laughed softly. Grace kept walking, pretending not to hear. Years of experience had taught her how. Then Victoria continued. Honestly, if people spent half as much energy raising their children as they do expecting sympathy. Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, considering. Then she said something much quieter, much more dangerous. Some people are meant to serve. The sentence landed like ice water. Grace stopped. Only for a second. Not because the words surprised her, because they reminded her of things she'd heard her entire life. Poor neighborhoods, cheap apartments, second jobs, people deciding your value before learning your name. She resumed walking, head high, tray steady. But Noah had heard it, every word. The boy sat perfectly still in his chair, watching, listening, keeping score. Later in the evening, another incident followed, this one impossible to ignore. Grace carried a tray of drinks through the dining room. Claire stood speaking with several guests. As Grace approached, Claire turned suddenly, a little too suddenly. Her wineglass tipped. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth. Gasps, murmurs. Everyone looked down, then toward Grace. Claire pressed a hand to her chest. Oh dear. The apology sounded practiced, almost rehearsed. Grace knew immediately. She had seen this performance before. Not from Claire, from countless others. The wealthy rarely humiliated people directly. They created situations, then stepped aside. Claire offered a sympathetic smile. Would you mind cleaning that up? The room went silent. Grace crouched beside the table. Napkins, cleaning spray, professional composure, the usual routine. But then her phone vibrated again. Lily. For a moment, Grace hesitated. Only a moment. Enough, Victoria noticed. So important. The woman laughed. Maybe she should focus on raising her own child instead of hanging around wealthy families. A few guests looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to hear. Claire said nothing, which somehow made it worse. Grace's hand tightened around the cloth. She wanted to answer, wanted to defend herself, wanted to tell them how hard she worked, how many nights she went without sleep, how many sacrifices single mothers made every day. Instead, she stayed silent, not because they were right, because Lily needed rent paid next month. The room blurred slightly. Humiliation has a strange way of doing that. Across the room, Ethan finally noticed. Not the wine, not the tablecloth. Grace. The woman from the hotel. The woman Noah watched. The woman Noah trusted. For the first time, Ethan saw something he had missed before. Dignity. Not weakness. Not submission. Dignity. Because despite the humiliation, despite the cruelty, despite every reason to break, Grace continued doing her job, with grace. The realization unsettled him. Then Ethan looked toward Noah, and froze. The boy's face had changed, not dramatically, but enough. For the first time in months, real emotion appeared there. Not sadness, not fear, anger, quiet, controlled, protective anger. The kind children feel when someone hurts a person they care about. Ethan stared. The room faded away. The investors. The conversation. The dinner. None of it mattered, because suddenly he understood something terrifying. Noah wasn't just noticing Grace. He cared about her, deeply. And Ethan had absolutely no idea how that had happened. Across the room, Noah continued watching Grace wipe away a stain she didn't create, watching adults look down on a woman who had done nothing wrong, watching her refuse to become small. And somewhere inside him, the decision he had begun making months ago became even stronger. The adults believed they had already chosen the future. Claire. The perfect family. The perfect story. The perfect ending. But they had forgotten one thing. The only person whose choice actually mattered, and that person was silently watching everything. Autumn arrived quietly in Los Angeles. The heat softened. The evenings grew cooler. The hills above the city turned gold beneath long sunsets. From the outside, life appeared unchanged. Grace still worked double shifts. Lily still waited for her at home with homework spread across the kitchen table. Noah still visited the Beverly Regency, and Ethan Whitmore still carried grief like an invisible weight across his shoulders. But beneath the surface, pressure was building. Every week brought another conversation, another suggestion, another carefully disguised demand. The board wanted stability. Investors wanted predictability. The media wanted a love story. And Claire Montgomery remained exactly where everyone expected her to be, at Ethan's side. One evening, that pressure finally exploded. The Whitmore estate glowed beneath the city lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Los Angeles, stretching endlessly into the darkness. Inside the library, a fire crackled softly. The room smelled of leather and old books. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like a courtroom. Ethan sat at one end of a long table. Across from him sat 3 members of the board, his late wife's mother, Claire, and 2 longtime family advisors. Noah sat quietly in a reading chair near the corner. A picture book rested open on his lap. No one paid attention to him. No one ever did during these conversations, which was precisely why he heard everything. One board member adjusted his glasses. "Ethan, we need to address reality." Ethan remained silent. The man continued. "The company is entering a major expansion." Another nodded. "The markets respond to confidence. Leadership matters. So does image." Ethan already knew where this was going. He'd heard versions of the speech for over a year. His mother-in-law leaned forward. "This isn't only about business." Her voice trembled with genuine concern. "It's about Noah." At the mention of his name, Noah looked up briefly, then lowered his eyes again. The adults continued. "He needs a family. He needs consistency. He needs a mother figure. He needs someone who understands him." Every sentence sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Pressure rarely arrives looking cruel. It arrives looking practical. Claire finally spoke, softly, carefully, like someone trying not to overstep. "I would never replace Elise." The room nodded. "I know that." Her eyes lowered. "But I loved her too." More nodding. "And I love Noah." The words floated through the room. Beautiful words. Perfect words. The exact words everyone wanted to hear. Noah stared at his book, not reading, listening. Claire continued. "If helping this family heal means standing beside them," she paused, "then that's what I'll do." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence people use when they believe they've heard something noble. Everyone looked toward Ethan, waiting, expecting. The decision had already been made in their minds. Only one person hadn't agreed. Ethan. For a long moment he said nothing. The fire crackled. Ice shifted inside a glass. The city lights blinked beyond the windows. Finally, Ethan stood. Slowly. Tiredly. A man who had spent 2 years being pushed in directions he never wanted to go. He walked toward the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over Los Angeles. When he spoke, his voice was calm, dangerously calm. "You all keep talking about what Noah needs." No one answered. "You talk about the company, the press, the future." Still silence. Then Ethan turned, and something in his face made the room uneasy, because grief had finally become anger. Not loud anger, exhausted anger, the kind that comes after being cornered too many times. "You want an answer?" Nobody moved. "You want to know when I'll marry again?" The board members exchanged glances. Claire sat perfectly still. Ethan nodded once, then delivered the sentence that would change everything. "If I ever remarry." The room leaned forward. "It will be the woman my son chooses." Silence. Absolute silence. For several seconds, nobody reacted, because nobody understood. Then they did, and the room changed. Claire blinked. One board member frowned. Another shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's mother-in-law looked stunned. The statement sounded reasonable, respectful, even touching. But everyone understood the truth beneath it. Noah hadn't spoken in 2 years. He never expressed opinions, never answered questions, never chose anything. The condition was impossible. The vow was a locked door, and Ethan had just thrown away the key. A board member finally spoke. "Ethan, no." The word landed like a hammer. No more conversations, no more pressure, no more discussions, no more plans. The room fell silent again. The meeting was over. People slowly stood, some frustrated, some disappointed, some angry. Claire remained seated. For the first time all evening, her perfect composure cracked. only slightly. But Noah saw it. The smile never quite reached her eyes. Not anymore. One by one, the adults left. The library emptied. Eventually, only Ethan remained, standing alone beside the fire, staring into the flames. Upstairs, Noah quietly closed his book. He slipped from the chair without making a sound. Nobody noticed. He walked toward the doorway, then paused, looking back. His father stood motionless, a lonely silhouette surrounded by a room full of things money could buy. For the first time in a very long while, Noah understood something. His father was trapped too, not by silence, by expectations. The realization stayed with him as he climbed the staircase. Later that night, lying awake in bed, Noah replayed every word. The woman my son chooses, again and again, like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. Because unlike every adult in that room, Noah understood exactly what the vow meant. For 2 years, people had tried to decide his future. Claire, the board, the family, the media, everyone. But now something had changed. For the first time, the choice belonged to him. Not someday. Now. And as moonlight spilled across his bedroom floor, the 7-year-old boy stared at the ceiling and thought about paper birds, hot chocolate, rain against glass, a woman who never asked him to be different, a woman who never used his mother's memory as a tool, a woman who never wanted anything from him. Downstairs, Ethan believed he had built an impossible condition, a promise nobody could ever fulfill, a permanent escape. But he had forgotten one thing. The silent child everyone treated like a spectator had been listening all along, and for the first time in 2 years, Noah Whitmore felt something dangerously close to hope, because he already knew something none of the adults knew. If the day ever came when he chose someone, he already knew exactly who it would be. 6 weeks later, the night arrived. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was the biggest charity event of the year. By sunset, Beverly Hills looked as if it had stepped into a movie. Black cars lined the entrance of the Grand Crescent Hotel. Valets hurried beneath glowing lights. Photographers gathered behind velvet ropes. Women in designer gowns climbed marble steps. Men in tailored tuxedos shook hands and discussed investments worth more than most neighborhoods. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the ballroom. 300 of the most influential people in California filled the room. Politicians, executives, celebrities, investors. Everyone wanted something. Access, influence, visibility. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood Ethan Whitmore, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, perfectly exhausted. A photographer called his name. Ethan, over here. Flash. Another camera. Another smile, another performance. Beside him stood Claire Montgomery, elegant in a silver gown. Beautiful, graceful, everything the magazines expected. Every photograph made them look like a couple. Every article pushed the same story. The future Mrs. Whitmore, the woman destined to heal the family, the woman everyone had chosen. Everyone except Noah. The boy stood beside his father wearing a navy blazer, small hands tucked into his pockets, silent, observing, always observing. Claire rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture meant to appear maternal, protective, natural. The cameras loved it. Noah endured it. Across the ballroom, through service corridors and kitchen doors, another world existed. Grace Turner tied her apron strings. Servers rushed past carrying trays. Managers checked schedules. Caterers moved between stations. The wealthy guests occupied the front of the house. The workers made the evening possible. Grace belonged to the second group. As far as she knew, it was just another shift. She had no idea Ethan Whitmore was there, No idea Noah was there. No idea her life was less than an hour away from changing forever. Back home, Lily was spending the evening with Mrs. Ramirez. Grace had kissed her daughter goodbye and promised to bring home dessert if the kitchen had leftovers. That promise felt like the most important thing in her world. Not billionaires, not galas, not society pages. Just a little girl waiting at home. The ballroom slowly filled. Music drifted through hidden speakers. Champagne sparkled beneath the lights. Conversations blended into a steady hum. Near the stage, members of Ethan's board gathered around him. The same people, the same pressure, different evening, same agenda. One board member smiled. This is exactly what the foundation needs. Another nodded toward Claire. People love seeing stability. Claire lowered her eyes modestly. The performance was flawless. Ethan said nothing. His gaze drifted across the room, toward Noah. The boy stood near a large window, watching the city lights, alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. Something tightened inside Ethan's chest. The sight reminded him too much of the last 2 years, too much of loss, too much of failure. The master of ceremonies soon took the stage. The room quieted. Speeches began. Awards, donor acknowledgments, applause. Everything proceeded exactly as planned. Meanwhile, Grace moved through the ballroom collecting empty glasses. Invisible, efficient, professional. Nobody remembered her name. Most never noticed her face. That was normal. Halfway through the evening, she bent beside a table to wipe away a splash of champagne. The task required her full attention, which was why she never noticed Noah watching her from across the room. The boy had seen her the moment he entered the ballroom, seen her before anyone else, before the speeches, before the cameras, before the pressure. The instant he saw her, something inside him became calm. The safe person was here, the only person in the room who wanted nothing. Around him, adults performed, smiled, negotiated, positioned themselves. Grace simply worked. That mattered, far more than anyone realized. The evening moved toward its centerpiece, the foundation speech. The moment Ethan always dreaded. He stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. The lights brightened. 300 faces turned toward him. Ethan thanked donors, mentioned scholarships, discussed community projects. Everything sounded polished, professional. Then it happened. A voice called out from one of the front tables, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So, Ethan." Laughter rippled through the room. The man grinned. "When are you finally getting married again?" More laughter. More smiles. More attention. The same question. Again. Always again. The ballroom waited. Ethan felt the familiar frustration rise inside him. The board watched. Claire watched. The cameras watched. Everyone expected an answer. So Ethan gave them the one he always gave. The truth. If I ever marry again. The room grew quieter. It will only be the woman my son chooses. The sentence landed exactly as it had weeks earlier. Surprise. Confusion. Awkward smiles. Everyone understood what it meant. Never. Noah didn't speak. Noah didn't choose. Noah couldn't unlock the door. The vow remained impossible. Ethan stepped away from the microphone. Conversation began returning. The moment should have ended there. It didn't. Because at that exact second, a chair moved. Noah stood. The sound was tiny, yet somehow it echoed. His grandmother reached for him. He stepped away. Claire offered a reassuring smile. Noah walked past her. The smile froze. One board member frowned. Guests began noticing. The room gradually fell silent. Heads turned, a wave moving across the ballroom. Noah kept walking, not hesitating, not wandering, walking with purpose, across the polished floor, past the front tables, past wealthy women who smiled hopefully, past executives, past politicians, past Claire, past every person the room considered important. The silence deepened. People exchanged confused glances. Where was he going? Even Ethan didn't know. A strange feeling gripped him, something between fear and anticipation. Noah? The boy didn't stop. He continued forward, straight toward the back of the ballroom, toward the service area, toward the workers, toward the people no one had noticed all evening. At the far end of the room, Grace crouched beside a spilled drink, a towel in one hand, a tray of empty glasses beside her. She looked up only because the room suddenly sounded wrong. Too quiet. 300 people had stopped talking. Grace followed their gaze, then froze. Noah Whitmore stood directly in front of her. For a moment, neither moved. The entire ballroom seemed suspended in time. The boy looked up. She looked down. The world narrowed. Then Noah reached out and took her hand. Gasps swept through the room. Someone dropped a glass. A camera flashed. Another. Another. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why was he here? Why her? Noah tightened his grip, not afraid. Certain. The certainty shocked her more than anything else. Then something happened that nobody in the room expected. Something even Ethan had stopped dreaming about. Noah spoke. His voice was small, clear, certain, and devastating. She sees me. The words echoed through the ballroom. Every conversation died. Every movement stopped. Grace stared. The room stared. But no one stared harder than Ethan. For 2 years he had waited. 2 years. Doctors, therapists, hope, disappointment, silence. And now, in a ballroom full of strangers, his son had spoken. Tears filled Ethan's eyes before he could stop them. The sound of Noah's voice hit him like a wave. His hands covered his mouth. The room blurred. Nothing existed except those 3 words. She sees me. Not Dad. Not Claire. Not a therapist. Not a teacher, her. Across the ballroom, Grace felt her own eyes sting, because she understood something the others didn't. Those words weren't about her. They were about Noah, about what he had been trying to say all along. And before anyone could react, before anyone could understand, before anyone could stop what was coming next, Claire Montgomery began walking toward them, with a smile on her face and ice in her eyes. Claire Montgomery crossed the ballroom slowly, deliberately, like someone approaching a stage she believed belonged to her. The crowd parted without being asked. 300 people watched. Noah still held Grace's hand. The boy's fingers remained wrapped around hers, as though letting go would somehow undo what he had just done, what he had just said. She sees me. The words still hung in the air, still echoed through the room, still shattered 2 years of silence. Ethan stood frozen near the stage. Tears glistened in his eyes. He barely noticed the cameras, barely noticed the crowd, barely noticed anything except the sound of his son's voice replaying in his head. She sees me. For one impossible moment, he had forgotten about everyone else. Claire hadn't. She reached them with perfect composure, every movement graceful, every expression measured. She looked down at Noah first. The smile softened, became maternal, protective. almost saintly, to anyone who didn't know better. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice carried beautifully across the silent ballroom. Noah's grip tightened around Grace's hand. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. Nothing escaped her when an audience was watching. She crouched slightly, not enough to wrinkle her gown, just enough to appear caring. What an emotional evening. The room relaxed a little. People nodded. That sounded reasonable. Safe. Then Claire looked up at the crowd and began turning the story. "You know," she gave a small, sad smile. "People often underestimate how vulnerable grief can make a child." A murmur moved through the room. Grace felt it immediately. The shift, the subtle movement of sympathy, away from Noah, away from the miracle, toward a narrative. Claire continued. "Gentle children can become deeply attached to anyone who shows them attention." The ballroom grew quieter. Guests exchanged glances. Several nodded. That sounded reasonable, too. Grace felt her stomach tighten. She knew where this was heading. She had seen people like Claire before, not as polished, not as wealthy, but similar. People who could wound without raising their voices. People who smiled while doing it. Claire finally turned toward Grace. The warmth vanished from her eyes, only for a second. But Grace saw it. Then the smile returned. "Oh, I'm sure none of this was intentional." The words landed softly, like velvet, like poison wrapped in silk. But this is exactly why boundaries matter. Several guests nodded. More whispers, more shifting. The room was tilting, slowly, dangerously. Claire sighed, looking almost heartbroken. "As adults, we have to be careful." She touched her chest, "especially when children are hurting." Then came the strike, the one she'd been building toward. If his mother could see this. She paused. Just long enough. "I think she'd be devastated." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Shockwaves, gasps, silence. Grace felt Noah stiffen beside her. The boy's face changed instantly. Pain. Not loud, not visible to most people. But Grace saw it, the same way she had always seen it. Claire saw it too, and kept going, because she mistook pain for opportunity. "I knew, Elise." Her voice trembled slightly. Perfectly. She loved her son more than anything. Several guests lowered their heads. Claire glanced toward Grace, then back to the crowd. "And I think we all know she wouldn't want him becoming confused by relationships he doesn't understand." There it was. The accusation. Not direct. Never direct. That would have sounded cruel. Instead, she let the crowd complete the thought themselves. The most dangerous kind of manipulation. Grace felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her. The maid. The black woman. The single mother. The employee. Suddenly, she wasn't Grace Turner anymore. She was suspicion. Opportunity. An outsider standing too close to something valuable. The whispers began. Quiet at first, then spreading. A woman near the front table leaned toward her husband. Another guest frowned. Someone shook their head. A photographer lowered his camera. The miracle was disappearing, being replaced, rewritten. Noah's first words in 2 years, reduced to gossip, reduced to scandal, reduced to speculation. Grace looked down. Noah was staring at the floor, his small shoulders tense. The confidence that had carried him across the ballroom was beginning to crumble. Because children always know when adults are turning against them. The boy's fingers tightened again, as if asking a silent question. Did I do something wrong? The sight broke something inside her. Not anger, something deeper. Protectiveness. The kind that arrives instantly when a child is being hurt. Grace barely noticed the cameras, barely noticed the wealthy guests, barely noticed Claire. All she saw was Noah. A brave little boy standing alone in the middle of a storm he never intended to create. And suddenly, she understood exactly what was happening. The room wasn't hearing him. Not really. Nobody was listening to what he had said. She sees me. 3 simple words. 3 honest words, yet somehow the adults had already transformed them into something else. Marriage, money, status, scandal, everything except the truth. Noah slowly looked up at her. Fear lived in his eyes now. Fear that his choice had hurt someone. Fear that he had made a mistake. Fear that speaking had been the wrong thing after all. Grace's heart ached, because she knew how much courage that voice had cost him. 2 years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of carrying grief alone. And the moment he finally spoke, adults had made it about themselves. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally started moving, but he stopped after only a few steps, because something unexpected happened. Grace gently squeezed Noah's hand and knelt. Right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of 300 powerful people, in front of cameras, in front of Ethan, in front of Claire. She turned her back to all of them, every last one, until only Noah existed. The room fell silent again, waiting, watching. Grace lowered herself to eye level, exactly the way she always had, exactly the way she had beside the piano, beside the hot chocolate, beside the paper birds. Her voice was soft, only for him. Hey. Noah swallowed. His eyes glistened. Grace smiled, the smallest smile, the safest smile, and said the words he desperately needed to hear. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. The boy blinked. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Grace nodded. You hear me? A pause. Bravest thing. The fear in his eyes began to loosen. Only slightly. But enough. You didn't do anything wrong. The sentence landed. Deep. Directly where it needed to. Grace had said almost the exact same thing to Lily in the rain. Now she said it again. To another child being punished for existing honestly. Noah's shoulders dropped slightly. His breathing steadied. Grace squeezed his hand one more time, then slowly stood and turned toward the room. The ballroom waited. Claire waited. Ethan waited. Everyone expected one of 2 things. Either Grace would defend herself, or she would collapse under the pressure. Instead, she did something nobody saw coming, and the first words out of her mouth would change everything. Grace Turner looked across the ballroom. 300 wealthy guests stared back. The room felt frozen in time. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Camera flashes occasionally sparked like distant lightning. The scent of expensive perfume floated through the air. And at the center of it all stood a hotel maid holding the hand of a little boy who had just broken 2 years of silence. Most people would have been terrified. Grace wasn't. Not because she was brave, because she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about Noah. That made all the difference. She looked directly at Claire Montgomery first. Not with anger, not with fear, with disappointment. The kind that cuts deeper. Then she spoke. He didn't choose a wife for his father. The sentence landed softly, Yet somehow every person in the room heard it. A murmur died before it could begin. Grace continued. He chose a friend for himself. Silence. Complete silence. The room seemed to inhale and forget how to exhale. Claire's expression tightened, only slightly. But enough. Grace turned slowly, looking beyond Claire, beyond Ethan, beyond the cameras, toward the crowd itself. The people who had already begun building stories. The people who had already decided what this moment meant. You've all been talking about marriage. Her voice remained calm. But that's not what happened here tonight. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. He didn't walk across this room looking for a mother. She glanced down at Noah. The boy never took his eyes off her. He didn't walk across this room looking for a fortune. A few guests lowered their gaze. He walked across this room because he trusted someone. The words hit harder than she intended. Because they were true. And truth often lands heavier than anger. Grace looked toward Noah again, then back to the crowd. And somehow all of you missed that. The room shifted, uncomfortable now, no longer confident, because deep down, many of them knew she was right. Claire stepped forward, still smiling, still polished, still trying to regain control. Grace, I don't think anyone means any harm. The statement sounded reasonable. That was Claire's gift. She could make almost anything sound reasonable. Grace nodded. I know. The answer surprised everyone, including Claire. Grace wasn't there to fight. That made her impossible to control. I don't think anyone here is trying to hurt him. A pause. But that's exactly what's happening. The room became quieter. Somewhere near the back, a champagne glass touched a table. The tiny sound echoed. Grace looked at Noah. Only Noah. You know what I heard tonight? The boy stared up at her. She smiled gently. I heard the bravest kid in the room. Something flickered across Noah's face. Something fragile. Something hopeful. Grace continued. I heard a boy who finally said something true. The tears that Ethan had been fighting finally escaped. One rolled down his cheek, then another. Nobody seemed to notice. Or perhaps everyone noticed and pretended not to. Grace slowly turned toward Claire. Her voice softened, which somehow made it even stronger. You keep talking about what his mother would have wanted. The room stiffened. Claire's smile faltered, only for a second. Grace saw it. So does everyone else. No one moved. No one spoke. Grace looked around the ballroom. I've listened to people tell children what they should feel for most of my life. She thought about Lily, about herself, about years of being dismissed, corrected, overlooked. But this little boy isn't a memory. The words landed hard. He's a person. Claire's eyes narrowed. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Grace. He's not a symbol, Grace said. He's not a project. Another pause. And he's not a key people get to use for their own plans. A visible ripple moved through the crowd. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, because suddenly, the conversation wasn't about Grace, or Claire, or marriage. It was about them, about everyone, about how easily adults stop seeing children. Grace lowered herself slightly and adjusted Noah's blazer collar. The gesture looked so natural, so familiar. It reminded Ethan of something he couldn't quite place. Then it hit him. Elise. Not because Grace resembled his wife. She didn't. Not at all. Because Elise used to do the same thing. The same absent-minded adjustment, the same instinctive care. Not for appearances, for comfort. The memory hit Ethan like a wave. Grace looked into Noah's eyes. The ballroom disappeared. For a moment it was only the two of them again. Just like the piano. Just like the hot chocolate. Just like the paper birds. You hear me? Noah nodded. Barely. But he nodded. The room gasped. Most people hadn't seen him respond to anyone in years. Grace smiled. Good. Then she said something nobody expected. Least of all, Ethan. I'm not your prize, sweetheart. The room froze. Every wealthy guest understood exactly what she meant. Grace glanced briefly toward the stage, toward the fortune, toward the future everyone assumed she would chase. Then back to Noah. And you're not anybody's key. The boy stared at her, listening, understanding. More than most adults. You are a brave little boy, Grace said softly. That's enough. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt sacred now, different from before. Warmer, honest. Then Grace straightened. She looked at Ethan for the first time. Really looked at him. The billionaire. The grieving father. The man standing at the center of a storm he never expected. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Yet something passed between them. Recognition. Respect. Nothing more. Nothing less. Grace nodded politely, then released Noah's hand. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Nobody understood. She had the attention of every powerful person in the room. She had sympathy, public support, possibly the future everyone dreamed about. And she was walking away. Just walking away. No demands, no phone number, no speech about destiny, no attempt to hold on. Nothing. She picked up her tray of empty glasses, the same tray she'd been carrying before any of this started. Then she turned and headed toward the service doors. The crowd parted automatically. Nobody stopped her. Nobody could. People watched her cross the ballroom, the exact way they had watched Noah earlier. But now they saw something entirely different. Dignity. The kind money couldn't buy. Halfway across the room, Grace stopped. Not because anyone called her name, because Noah had. Very quietly. Almost too quietly to hear. Grace. The room froze again. Another word. His second word. 2 years of silence. And now 2 words in a single night. Grace turned. Noah stood exactly where she had left him. Small, brave, terrified. The entire ballroom watched. The boy swallowed, then spoke again. Will you still watch for me? The question shattered whatever composure remained in the room. Several guests wiped away tears. Even people who had judged Grace minutes earlier looked down, ashamed, because now everyone finally understood. This had never been about marriage. It had never been about wealth. It had never been about opportunity. It was about a child asking whether the one person who saw him would disappear too. Grace's eyes filled instantly. She smiled. The same smile she always gave him. Warm, steady, safe. I'll always watch for you. Noah closed his eyes briefly. Relief washed over his face. The kind only children can show. Pure, unfiltered, real. Grace nodded one last time, then disappeared through the service doors. Gone. Just like that. The ballroom remained silent long after she left. Nobody seemed to know what to do. Because the fairy tale everyone expected had just been rejected. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly. Grace Turner had walked away from the biggest opportunity of her life. And in doing so, she had become impossible to forget. Across the room, Claire Montgomery stood motionless. For the first time all evening, she had no script, no response, no strategy, because she had spent years preparing to compete against ambition, against romance, against attraction. She had never prepared to compete against genuine goodness, and that terrified her. Meanwhile, Ethan remained rooted to the floor. His son stood beside him, still silent, but different now. Lighter somehow, as if speaking had opened a window after years trapped in darkness. Ethan looked toward the service doors where Grace had disappeared, then down at Noah. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't wondering why his son had chosen her. He was wondering how everyone else had failed to see what Noah saw immediately. And 3 days later, that question would finally lead Ethan Whitmore to find Grace Turner. The media storm began before sunrise. By morning, clips from the gala had spread across social media. A silent boy, a billionaire's vow, a black maid. 3 words. She sees me. Everyone had an opinion. Most had no idea what they were talking about. Television hosts debated it. Bloggers speculated. Comment sections exploded. Some called it heartwarming. Others called it suspicious. A few repeated the ugliest version of the story. The version Claire had quietly helped create. The ambitious employee. The vulnerable child. The grieving billionaire. The fairy tale. The scandal. Grace ignored all of it. Because rent still needed paying, Lily still needed breakfast, and life rarely pauses for gossip. 3 days after the gala, Grace stood beneath fluorescent lights inside the South Los Angeles community kitchen. The building wasn't impressive. Old brick walls, faded paint, metal folding tables, a leaking faucet nobody had fixed yet. But every evening it fed hundreds of people. And Grace loved it. Not because it paid well. It didn't. Not because it was glamorous. It wasn't. Because it mattered. Steam rose from industrial soup kettles. Volunteers moved between tables. The scent of fresh bread filled the air. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the neighborhood. Inside, people who had nowhere else to go found warmth. Grace stood behind a serving station ladling soup into bowls. An elderly man thanked her. She smiled. A young mother arrived carrying a toddler. Grace added an extra dinner roll. Nobody noticed. Nobody applauded. That was how kindness usually worked. Quietly, without witnesses. The front door opened. Cold air slipped inside. Grace barely looked up, then froze. Ethan Whitmore stood in the doorway. No cameras, no assistants, no security team. Just Ethan. A plain dark coat, tired eyes, and the expression of a man who had spent 3 days trying to understand something. The room barely noticed him, which was probably a new experience. Grace stared. He stared back. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan walked forward. Not like a billionaire, like a father. That difference mattered. The volunteers continued working around them. Metal trays clattered softly. People talked. Life carried on. Grace set down the ladle. "What are you doing here?" The question wasn't hostile, just honest. Ethan glanced around the kitchen, at the volunteers, the families, the worn tables, then back at her, looking for an answer. Grace almost laughed. "You're probably in the wrong place." "No." His voice was quiet. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The sincerity surprised her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan looked toward a volunteer helping an elderly woman find a seat. You do this after work? Most nights. Why? Grace shrugged. The answer seemed obvious. People are hungry. Ethan stared. Not because the answer was profound, because it was simple. The best truths usually are. Finally, he said the thing that had brought him there. You're the first person in 2 years who looked at my son and didn't see something you wanted. The room seemed to fade. The words landed harder than Grace expected. Ethan continued. Every doctor wanted progress. Every therapist wanted improvement. Every reporter wanted a story. Every relative wanted healing. A sad smile crossed his face. Every person in my life wanted something from him. His eyes met hers. You didn't. Grace looked away first. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Because she had never considered it unusual. Children weren't projects. They were children. The fact that this seemed remarkable broke her heart. Meanwhile, several miles away, Noah sat at the Whitmore estate. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Not completely. Because words had returned. Slowly, carefully. Like sunlight creeping through a door left slightly open. He still didn't talk much. Most of the day he remained quiet. But now people knew the silence wasn't permanent. The difference changed everything. That evening, Ethan brought him to the community kitchen. Not planned, not discussed, just instinct. When they arrived, Noah immediately spotted Grace. The moment he saw her, something relaxed inside him. The same thing that always relaxed. Safety. Grace smiled. The same smile. Nothing had changed. No expectations. No pressure. No speeches about bravery. Just, "Hey, Noah." The boy nodded. Then surprised everyone. He walked directly toward her. No hesitation. No fear. The volunteers exchanged curious looks. Grace handed him a dinner roll. He accepted it, then sat nearby while she worked. The normalness of the moment felt extraordinary. Ethan watched from across the room. Watching Grace interact with Noah felt like watching someone speak a language he had never learned. No tricks, no strategies, no expertise. Just presence. Hours later, after most guests had left and volunteers began cleaning up, Noah sat beside Grace at one of the folding tables. The room had grown quiet. The evening nearly finished. Grace wiped down a counter. Ethan stacked chairs. The sight felt surreal. A billionaire stacking chairs. Yet there he was. Noah watched both of them, thinking, remembering. Finally, Ethan sat down across from his son. The moment felt fragile, like something important was approaching. He spoke carefully. Noah. The boy looked up. Ethan swallowed. 1,000 questions lived inside him. Only one mattered. Why her? Silence. Not the old silence. Thinking silence. Different. Grace quietly stepped away, giving them space. Ethan waited. For once, he didn't rush, didn't push, didn't fill the quiet. Minutes passed. Then Noah spoke. Softly. Clearly. I heard you. Ethan blinked. What? The night. Noah looked down. The library. The realization hit instantly. The vow. The meeting. The conversation. Ethan sat perfectly still. You heard all of it? A small nod. The room suddenly felt much smaller, much more important. Noah continued, slowly, each word deliberate. You said, he paused, the woman I choose. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Yes. Another pause. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I didn't pick her because she was there. Grace stopped wiping the counter. Ethan looked stunned. Noah stared at his hands. I picked her because she was real. The words settled over the room. Simple, honest, devastating. Nobody spoke. Noah continued. Claire always talked about Mom. His voice grew quieter. Everybody talked about Mom. He swallowed. They talked to me. A pause. Grace talked to me too. Then he shook his head. No. Another pause. She talked with me. The difference nearly broke Ethan, because suddenly he understood. All of it. The hot chocolate, the paper birds, the dog, the trust, the choice, everything. Noah looked toward Grace and then back to his father. I saw her with Lily. The rain, the humiliation, the protection, the dignity. All the moments adults thought children forgot. Noah remembered every one. She never pretended. His voice grew stronger. She never wanted anything. Tears filled Ethan's eyes again, because the boy wasn't describing Grace anymore. He was describing what safety felt like, what love felt like, what honesty felt like. For 2 years, everyone had tried to solve Noah. The entire time, Noah had been quietly solving them, watching, learning, choosing. And now, at last, he had spoken the truth nobody else could see. The silence had never meant he wasn't paying attention. It meant he was. More than anyone realized. Across the room, Grace stood motionless. Her heart ached. Not because Noah had chosen her, because she finally understood how lonely he had been, how long he had been carrying all of this alone. Then Noah looked directly at Ethan and asked the question that truly mattered. Do I still get to choose? The room went still, because for the first time in years, a child wasn't being told what his future would be. He was asking whether his voice mattered, and Ethan Whitmore finally knew the answer. More importantly, he finally knew how to say it. Ethan looked directly at his son. The community kitchen had grown quiet. Most of the volunteers had gone home. Only a few remained, stacking chairs and wiping tables beneath the soft glow of fluorescent lights. Outside, South Los Angeles hummed with the sounds of an ordinary evening. A passing bus, distant traffic, a barking dog somewhere down the street. Inside, something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in years, a father and son were truly talking. Noah sat across from Ethan, small hands folded together, waiting, not for instructions, not for correction, for an answer. Do I still get to choose? The question echoed inside Ethan's chest, because suddenly he understood how badly he had failed to ask the one thing that mattered. Not what Noah needed, not what Noah should do, what Noah wanted. The difference felt enormous. Ethan swallowed hard, then answered. Yes. Noah didn't move, almost as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steadier now. Yes. Another pause. Then he smiled sadly. You should have been allowed to choose a long time ago. The boy lowered his eyes. Emotion flickered across his face. Relief. Grace looked away for a moment, giving them privacy. Even now. Even here. She wasn't trying to become part of the moment. That was exactly why she belonged in it. Weeks passed, then months, and for the first time since Elisa's death, healing stopped feeling like a destination. It became a process, slow, uneven, real. Ethan started showing up at the community kitchen, not with reporters, not with donations, not with publicity teams, just Ethan. Sometimes he washed dishes, sometimes he carried boxes, sometimes he simply sat and talked with people. The volunteers were suspicious at first, then amused. Eventually, they accepted him, mostly because Grace did. Noah came too. At first, he stayed close to his father. Then gradually, he began helping, passing bread, stacking trays, greeting guests. The words came slowly, one at a time, then two, then sentences. The silence that had once trapped him started fading, not disappearing, transforming. Because Noah was learning something important. His voice was safe. Meanwhile, Lily adored having company, especially company that understood what loneliness felt like. The friendship between Lily and Noah grew naturally. Homework at folding tables, board games after shifts, shared jokes, shared snacks, children doing what children do best, finding each other. One rainy afternoon months later, Grace arrived at the community kitchen to find Ethan struggling with a box of canned goods. The sight made her laugh. The billionaire looked offended. "I run a company with 12,000 employees." Grace folded her arms. "And yet the soup cans are winning." He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that hadn't visited him often in recent years. Moments like that began happening more frequently. Conversations stretched longer. Coffee became dinners. Dinners became routines. Still, Grace remained cautious. Very cautious. One evening after closing, Ethan finally asked the question everyone expected. Not a proposal. Not yet. Something smaller. More important. "What are you afraid of?" Grace looked out the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The answer came immediately. "Noah." Ethan frowned. "What about him?" Grace turned toward him. "I won't become another person who leaves." The words landed heavily. Because both of them understood. Loss changes people, especially children. If this doesn't work, she paused. He pays the price. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he nodded, not arguing, not persuading, understanding. That night changed everything, because Ethan finally realized something. Winning Grace's trust wasn't about romance. It was about consistency, about showing up, again and again and again. So he did. He attended Lily's school concert, helped Noah with science projects, spent Saturdays serving meals, learned how to listen instead of fixing. For the first time in his life, success couldn't be measured by quarterly reports. It had to be earned. One ordinary day at a time. Then came the collapse of Claire Montgomery's carefully constructed future. It happened quietly, the way truth often does. An internal review uncovered a series of communications between Claire and several entertainment reporters. Private messages, leaked photographs, planted stories, strategic articles designed to create public pressure around a future marriage. Nothing illegal, but revealing. Very revealing. The story never exploded publicly. Ethan made sure of that. No revenge, no humiliation, no public destruction. Just distance. Permanent distance. When confronted, Claire finally admitted something she had spent years hiding from herself. She loved the idea of the family more than the actual people inside it. That realization ended everything. Grace felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Because some people spend their entire lives confusing love with possession. A year passed, then another season, then another. And one bright spring afternoon, the backyard of the South Los Angeles community kitchen transformed. White chairs lined the grass, string lights hung between trees, fresh flowers decorated folding tables. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed for magazines. Everything real. exactly the way Grace wanted it. The wedding guest list barely reached 40 people. Volunteers, neighbors, friends, Mrs. Ramirez, several kitchen regulars, the people who had actually been there, the people who mattered. No television crews, no reporters, no photographers chasing headlines. Just family, just love, just truth. Lily served as flower girl, taking her responsibilities with almost comical seriousness. Noah stood beside Ethan, a little taller now, a little older, a lot louder. The transformation still amazed people who remembered the silent boy from before. The ceremony began beneath a clear California sky. Grace walked down a simple aisle. No designer gown, no diamonds, just elegance, just dignity, just grace. Ethan looked at her the same way he had looked at her in the ballroom months ago. Only now he understood what Noah had understood first. The ceremony itself was short, simple, perfect. Then came the reception. Laughter filled the yard. Children ran between tables. Music drifted through warm evening air. The scent of barbecue and fresh bread floated everywhere. As the sun began setting, someone tapped a glass. The crowd turned. Noah stood, holding a small note card. The guests smiled. Grace felt tears already threatening. The boy looked around nervously, then began speaking. His voice was steady, strong. I used to think nobody could see me. Silence settled over the gathering. The good kind, the listening kind. Noah continued. After my mom died, a pause. Everybody wanted me to get better. Several guests wiped their eyes. I know they loved me. Another pause. But sometimes people were so busy trying to fix me. His voice softened. They forgot to see me. The backyard became completely silent. Then Noah looked at Grace and smiled, the same small smile he once gave from behind the piano. She saw me first. Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. Across from her, Ethan lowered his head. Noah turned toward his father, then smiled again. And then Dad did too. There wasn't a dry eye left in the yard. Not one. The applause lasted a long time. Longer than the speech. Longer than the sunset. Longer than anyone expected. Years later, people would still tell the story. Not about the billionaire. Not about the vow. Not about the gala. They would tell the story of a woman everyone overlooked. A woman who cleaned floors, worked double shifts, raised a daughter alone, and changed a little boy's life simply by seeing him, because that was the truth hidden beneath everything else. Grace Turner never saved Noah with money, or advice, or grand gestures. She saved him with something much rarer. Attention, patience, kindness without conditions. And in the end, that kindness changed more than Noah. It changed Ethan. It changed Lily. It changed an entire family. Funny enough, the biggest twist was never that a billionaire married a maid. The biggest twist was that the only person in the room who truly understood what Noah needed was the one everyone else had failed to see. And a little boy who spent 2 years in silence saw her before anyone else did. Sometimes that's how life works. The loudest people miss the truth, and the quietest person in the room sees everything. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share the name of someone who truly saw you when the world didn't, because those people deserve to be remembered. And here's something simple I'd love to know before you go. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, type a simple one in the comments. If you've ever felt invisible and wished someone would truly see you, type a simple 0. No long message needed, just a single number. I'll be reading the comments, and I'd love to see how many hearts connected with this story today. And if stories like this inspire you, stories about kindness, second chances, unexpected miracles, and ordinary people changing lives in extraordinary ways. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss the next story waiting just around the corner. Until next time, take care of yourself. Take care of someone else, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest turning point in someone's life. I'll see you in the next story.